So in this video, I would like to break down to you the concept of the big three. I've talked about it a lot on this channel, so I'm excited to finally be doing a video where I can clearly explain it to you. It'll also be useful for reference next time I talk about it and someone asks a question. But basically, this is a fundamental mixing concept that my mentor taught me that helped me lock in the most important elements of my mix, fit everything around that to make sure my stuff sounds balanced, competitively clear, and loud. The big three is really just an instrument grouping concept, and it comes into three groups. And so the first group is anything that would be considered like a very powerful low-end instrument, or anything that could give you a very powerful low-end transient, things like 808s, kicks, and even the bass elements, or like a bass guitar, for example. The second element of the big three is whatever would be your main snare. So for this specific beat, which I'm gonna let you hear in a second, it's this main snare. Now sometimes like accenting snares can be included in that. The caveat is that it would have to be whatever is like kind of like main. So if it's an accenting snare, that is still very, very pivotal in establishing that balance in that group. But I really do usually mean just that main snare that's hitting, like in trap, it would be whatever is hitting on that three, or in drill, it would be that offset snare. The first one hits on the three, then the next one hits on the four, so on and so forth. So that's the second part. And then the last part of the big three is your main melody. Now, if you were mixing vocals, because my mentor, who is an engineer and taught me engineering, taught me from the perspective of mixing vocals. So actually, it's supposed to be the lead vocal as the thing that's in that last slot. But if you're just mixing a beat, then for the purpose of using this concept, it would be that main melody. And that's how it all ends up working out. You want to understand that these things are supposed to be the loudest things in your mix. Loud is a deceiving word though, and I truly do mean more present. I described it in an order that is important. So that low end will be the loudest or most perceived thing. Then it'll be that main snare. Then it'll be in that melody. And then right before we get into how to actually execute with this, by leveling things relative to each other using this big three concept, I just like to make a note about melodies from time to time, is that they will usually just overall be the most quiet thing in your mix, but because of their very wide frequency distribution and also stereo separation, they will always be perceived as considerably louder than whatever your gain setting says it would be, simply because of that. Let us get into actually using the big three to level this beat. First of all, let me let you hear it. I got a loop from my bro, Too Blessed to Be Stressed. We're actually working on a collab album, so I'm really excited about everything that I'm working on, and I'm excited that I get to use it to teach you stuff about production as I go. It's fun to like do the stuff and then actually show you. So it's already sounding loud, it's already sounding powerful. We've already got our soft clipper set up, and we've already got some nice signal flow set up. I've got full guides for overall mixing and signal flow specifically linked down below, with a bunch more coming on various topics, so definitely check that out. The first thing I will usually start with is my 808. And right now I'm kind of just looking for an anchor point, because this is going to be the second loudest thing. I like to have my kick a little bit louder, but I like to start by anchoring my 808, and I think it's different from a lot of mix engineers, but they will usually tend to start with some kind of low-end instrument. But you want to keep an eye, especially concerning the concept of signal flow, on what's actually happening with the overall amount of gain for each signal. So even though I'm seeing 15 here on the track for the 808, in my drum bus, it's hitting at 12 with just the 808. And then if we come to the master, because of all the processing that's going on, I don't even have an equalizer on the 808 yet. We've got some processing going on with ozone, and then we've got some clipping. So by the time the signal gets to the master, it's at -6, which is pretty loud and doesn't give me a lot of headroom left. So this concept works really, really well in tandem with just a solid understanding of headroom. So that being said, I'm going to really bring this signal all the way down. And I think I want to anchor at -15 just based off the master, because that'll give me a lot of headroom, which is really, really good. The more headroom you can have while having a very tight mix, the better, because you can always use brick wall limiting and soft clipping and just kind of like very basic mastering concepts, if you can even call them that, to get your stuff to hit louder. But it's really hard to like get any quality sound out of something that's over compressed because you hit it against the ceiling and then just clipped it completely off. Okay, so now it's at -15, but I'm gonna bring it down just a little bit more, because I'm gonna add an equalizer, which is gonna add some gain back into that. I'm gonna clean up some muddiness right around 200 hertz. Power coming from low end frequencies is usually pretty strong, because bass has a more spread out waveform, so it travels further over time. And I like that. Let's see if it added any gain to the overall signal. Just a little bit, but we can actually kind of push it up now without getting any of the muddiness from that frequency range. And now that I've got my 808 like anchored, I bring in my kick and I'm kind of just listening where I want this to sit. I'm kind of having an understanding that I want it to sit on top of the 808. Now, this is where practice comes in, because at the end of the day, none of this is like a mathematical process. Like, there's no formula that's going to work every single time. So it's an art. A lot of my mentors say at the end of the day, it's not like a math thing, it's an art, and you can't forget that. So I like to level from off to on. Something I'm going to do is route that to the master as well, just to get some added punch and gain off the kick. That's hitting pretty hard already. So then I'm just gonna add an equalizer to this kick as well, and I'm just gonna high pass some of those super low frequencies. And this is just a technique that helps, you know, the kick sit a little bit better on top of the 808. Let's come back and look at the master now. It's perfect. So now we have so much extra headroom. Let's go to the next part of the big three, which is gonna be that main snare. Off to on. So main snare, less loud than the low end, but it is going to be the second loudest thing by gain and by perceived loudness and presence. But that being said, now we can level in our melody from off to on, and we'll just turn on all of its buses, and then we'll level this from off to on. Okay, so I really like that. There might be some tweaking that comes in later, but the real thing is just having them relate really well to each other. Having the kick and the 808 have a good relationship, and then having them have good relation or relative volume to the second grouping of the big three, which is that main snare. Again, that main snare should be a little bit more quiet, but still very powerful, still present. And then that main melody. Now, coming in and looking at everything, like I was saying, that melody is going to have the least gain, but it's still very present. You know what I'm saying? Simply because of that frequency distribution and stereo separation. Part 2 of this is understanding how to bring everything else in once you've got the big three locked in. And the only thing you really have to understand, other than my personal like workflow for leveling stuff in, is that everything else is supposed to be an accent to the big three. So that being said, let us just work through this. Again, we're going to just be leveling everything from off to on. I would also like to mix everything in mono. This is just like a mixing technique that I like to use from time to time. I like to do it because when you put it in mono, that means every signal you're hearing is just mono down the middle, and it kind of gives you a more realistic way that the sounds are relating to each other, at least digitally. And it does have an interesting way of like when it's like put out in analog of kind of like hear how things relate to each other better. So if you do struggle with it, or if you with that concept, or if you just want to try mixing in mono, it can be something very helpful. Since there's no more low end instruments, I'll just go ahead and bring in the clap, because that's the next closest thing to something in the big three. It's close to that snare. And I'm just listening. It shouldn't be louder than the low end, and it shouldn't be louder than the main snare, but it could technically be louder than the melody, even though the melody will be more present. Right there, I like that. I actually want to bring in some other perks before we get into the high-end resonating metallics. Check out my last drum programming guide if you want to learn about like the metallic concept and just how I program drums in general. I like that. That's hard. No, the bounce on this is crazy. All right, let's bring in the triangle. All right, let's bring in that open hat. So again, some of these metallic things, so triangle, open hat, hi-hat, and even the perks, technically by gain, louder than the melody. Melody will be more present than any of these. So you want them to be present and they drive the bounce, but should never be louder than, say, the main snare, for example. Like your hi-hats, again, open hat should never be louder than main snare. Big three's gotta pop, it's gotta be present because it's what's gonna drive the bounce. All right, now let's separate it and see. Bro, and we're just peaking at -9, so now what we can do is literally just turn up the gain on the clipper, baby. That shit sound clean. It's hard and clean, yo. And we still have so much headroom. We still have so much headroom. So for this last section, I just want to talk about a couple of things that I would do to make the big three shine a little bit more at this point. It's kind of more of adding flavor and flourish at the end of the process. These are just a few things that I like to do. I will probably compress the melody, for example. So this melody is not super dynamic. And the other thing I should make note of is that like really good sample makers usually will do good effects, including compression. It'll just be like a well-mixed melody, and Too Blessed is definitely one of those guys who his equalization, leveling, and compression is good. But depending on your taste or depending on what you're going for in a mix, even if you are working with people who know how to do that, there might be some ways that you want to manipulate the dynamics in a way that they didn't. So I'll just come in, take a look at it. I'll probably solo it just to listen to it. It's barely that dynamic, but for the purpose of demonstrating it, right, I might set the ratio to something relatively small, like 4, and then we can set attack to be pretty quick, and then release to be like that, something like that, just to start. And then we'll bring the threshold down because there's a transient when that piano bass hits that makes it a little bit dynamic. So if I wanted to make it pop a little bit more, the first thing I do is just compress it so that piano bass is, you know what I'm saying, not sticking out as much, and you can even see it compressing right now. But I think I wanted to let go of it a little quicker, so I'm gonna reduce the release just a little bit, and I'm gonna increase the attack a little bit too, because I want it to kind of swell into the compression. That's hard actually, that's hard actually. And then the thing I can do now is take the overall signal up with the makeup gain and the limiter. And now my melody is going to be more present without the like dynamic popping from that piano bass. It's so subtle, but yeah, it really brings up the dynamics and just makes the melody that much clearer. So compression is one thing that I like to do. The second thing is like sidechain compression. So it's literally just another compression concept. But this is something I like to do to like make the kick stand out. Sometimes I will sidechain the kick to the 808, but because I already like their relationship, I'm more so thinking about how I could get this specific kick to stand out compared to some things that aren't the big three, like the hi-hat, for example. So what I could do is open up a compressor on the hi-hat, and then I can route the kick here by sidechaining to this track, go to the compressor, set the input signal to be that rat kick, and then we'll set the ratio again, like 4 is probably fine. Attack something reasonable, release something also reasonable, but we'll just be shaping the compression in a second anyway, so that doesn't really matter. And then we'll just set that threshold. And so what is happening is that the kick is now triggering compression on the hi-hat every time the kick sends in a signal, which is going to this limiter. So it's going to reduce the volume of that hi-hat a little bit, which is going to just allow that kick to like pop a little bit more, sound a little bit harder. And again, this is just manipulating that perception of the sound to get what we want, which is a more present big three, which is going to lead to a more balanced sounding big three, which is going to lead to more clear sounding, more loudly perceived sounding music. So I do have a really cool compression module coming up in Dope, which is on the back end of my website. It's a part of my label, and you also get to like join me on producing for artists and producing for my own music on Spotify and even making content. There's a bunch of cool perks, so definitely check it out. If you want to learn more about compression, I also have a cool little newsletter coming out about it later this week. So join the newsletter by getting the 14 drum kit. If you want to learn more about these various like compression techniques that I just used. Actually, it's going to be a 4 to 8 week module just on compression. I'm teaching the homies really how I use it to color sound and just design my tracks in a really interesting way. Definitely check out Dope. First link in the description down below if you're interested. So the last thing I like to do to make my big three shine, though, so we can really get into it, is cooking the snare per se. And what I'll do is just add some kind of distortion or compression to the snare. So I like to do this with Radiator. It's one of like my favorite saturation tools right here in FL Studio that I have. It's literally just as simple as picking a setting that gives it like that nice flavor of amp that I'm looking for. I'll usually turn off the noise because I don't want that, and it just makes that snare sound so much more poppy and present. It really just, it's like sausage fattener but better, if you know about that VST. And then from there It's just getting it to sit in the mix the way you want it to. And I like to call it cooking the snare because I came up with this workflow while using Radiator, and Radiator just makes me think of like things being heated up, which is why I call it cooking the snare. But basically, we just want to add loudness, some kind of compression, distortion, saturation to the snare to get it to be perceived as more present. Technically, even equalization can do that. Even if you wanted to gate the snare or add reverb or something, those could also be techniques you could use. So that's what I got for you. That's the big three. Go out and use it in your beats. Come back and comment and let me know how it serves you. I really do hope it helps. So I'm going to get out of here. I just want to say shout out to Dope. They make it possible for me to make these informative, educational, inspirational videos without taking any corny sponsorships for anyone. So if you want to learn more about joining my label, check out the first link in the description below. Like I said, we are doing a 4 to 8 week module just on compression and how I use it to make my tracks sound unique. So check out the first link in the description below if you want to learn more about what you get outside of just direct mentorship from me. But anyway, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for your attention. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Peace.